All right, how are we looking on that? I'm gonna take that as probably good.
Yeah, you're good.
Sweet. All right, hello everybody of the Blockchain Lab community. Week 3's lecture is going to be on crypto mining, and is presented by yours truly. So I thought I'd get kicked off with just a little bit of a recap from last lecture, which was cryptography and consensus. I thought I'd bring a little recap because it has been 3 weeks since the last lecture, but Liam did run the last one. So if you were not able to attend or you haven't seen it, it is posted on the Blockchain Labs YouTube channel, as well as if anything I cover here, if you want to have a little bit more insight on it, feel free to message Liam in the Discord, and I'm sure he'll be happy to cover that up. But the first thing that was covered was just the hash function, which is a mathematical process that takes an input of any size and hashes it into an output of a fixed size. So that with blockchain specifically has to do with like the math problems. Like if you look at like Bitcoin, the solution to that is the hash function. The key, essentially the instructions that Cypher uses to encode or decode a message. And then to make it a little bit more authentic is the second key, which we need a more secure method, that single key cryptography. So I put a little graphic there to the right. Liam talked about that graphic. And then with the next point of signing, it was the same graphic, but instead of encrypting, it is signing with a signature. And it has to be like the same signature across the two to therefore prove it's legitimate. And then public and private key transactions. Blockchain uses a combination of techniques by first encrypting using the receiver's public key and signing using the sender's private key, and then allows us to send an encrypted transaction that is publicly verifiable. That was all taken right off the slides. It's just a quick update there. And then consensus, the way in which the blockchain comes to an agreement on what the current correct version of the chain is. And then he covered quickly with the proof of work and proof of stake. And I will be covering more in depth of proof of work today. I will not be covering proof of stake. That will be covered in a later lecture, which is pretty interesting because things like Ethereum that are hopping over to that side. But we'll get on with the proof of work stuff and the mining. So mining is a guessing game. So anybody can participate in building the network. Some people describe this as be your own banker, because you are able to hop on the network and further create this network and therefore be a quote unquote a banker and prove things legitimate and prove transactions legitimate. So as a miner, or you're a miner, to talk about like the hardware side of it, guesses a proper solution to a math problem. And I'll get into this more in the later slides. But once you do then prove this math problem is true, then you then have control of a block, and the pending transactions then run through your block, and the network verifies that all of these transactions go through it, and therefore it updates the ledger. That is a very simple way to put it and not very in depth, but I'll get more into that as well as we go. But miners with more power will guess the proper solution more. So what I'm getting to here is that the reason that people are spending all this money on really expensive GPUs and on like proper actual miners is that if you do have more power, you'll be able to guess that solution earlier than the other computers, and therefore all of the everything running through like that like block that you just like created will then go through yours because you have a more powerful system, and I'll get into that as well. But due to the laws of statistical probability, they will not always get it. So like this is like part of like proof of work, is that like, let's say it's not as simple as I'm going to have a race of someone running and someone riding a bike. The person riding a bike is always going to win that race. It's not as simple as that. It is actually like, let's say the person running is 10% slower than the person riding a bike. The way that proof of work works is that person will just actually be successful 10% less of the time. And the reason that happens is that there's so many mathematical checks that needs to happen. It's not like one's always going to get there first, because there's other variables that play into it when it comes to like luck and other things as well. But that's just like a very basic analogy. That's what MIT actually uses, is that like as comparing a very expensive computer to the bike and a very basic computer to the person running. The one will not always win, but I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. You then receive your miner payment, which is a block, reward, and any transaction fees. So this is if you then guess the proper math equation, and therefore that's your hash. The miner who that does this gets a block reward when it comes to like for Bitcoin, it is actual Bitcoin and any transaction fees. So when I talk about transaction fees, that is all the transactions that run through your block that the rest of the network then verifies and updates the ledger. Everything that goes to the transaction fees through your block, you also get that as well. So with all of this, this created an arms race, and that is by saying, like I said, like a more strong or like a bigger, stronger, faster computer, even if it is 10% faster, that 10% gain is pretty large. So it's created an arm race of, like, you see all these warehouses being built of people wanting to have like that much better of a computer because they'll get to the solution before any others. And it's created an arms race in a sense. So that was just the very basic slide of like quick rundown of what blockchain mining is or crypto mining is. If you watch like a 3-minute YouTube video, they'd probably cover those exact single points there, but I'll get into a little bit more. So mining difficulty. So Satoshi Nakamoto, the famous man who created Bitcoin, crafted the rules for mining in a way that the more mining power the network has, the harder it is to guess the answer. So this is self-adjusting to the accumulated mining power the network possesses. So what this is saying is that if there is more people trying to mine, it'll be that much harder to then answer those problems. And then it creates a like nice equilibrium of blocks being able to be mined, and therefore Bitcoin's being released into the network. And as I say here, the goal is to keep inflation in check. And ideally, the system that's put into place is that a block gets added every 10 minutes. So that means a solution gets added every 10 minutes. And then transactions can then flow through that new block. And with this 10-minute time frame, that is how like a lot of time frames are based off of Bitcoin, is based off this 10 minutes. Is like, for example, as we talked about in the first lecture as well, that Bitcoin halves every 4 years. And the way that they get this 4-year time frame is based off the idea that a new block gets produced every 10 minutes. And yeah, so a way you can get into this crazy mining business without actually having this huge warehouse of computers or going out there and hopping on eBay and fighting all the kids for in the auctions to get yourself a good GPU, you can hop into mining pools. So it's a very simple idea, and it's just miners come together to form a pool. So you can then buy into these pools, and it's like everybody combines all of their resources to then be able to fight against the big dogs. So a couple examples of them are like btc.com, ant pool, slush pool, etc. This is a graphic here that just shows all of the biggest pools that there are. Majority, if not all of them, are Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is still the #1 most dominant proof of work cryptocurrency there is out there. But as you can see here in the blue section, ant pool, that is the 25.2% one. And that is what you'll see everywhere if you start looking into mining pools and if you want to get into mining pools. And if you have more questions about mining pools, hop in the investors channel, and I am sure you guys will be happy to clarify that a little bit more. Yeah. So proof of work energy consumption. This is a big thing that's talked about a lot when it comes to Bitcoin mining, because especially things with like Elon Musk hopping on his Twitter and like revoking the usage of Bitcoin at Tesla because he said it is very bad for the environment. This is what's talked about a bunch. So this is a couple of the stats that go hand in hand with how much energy is actually used for specifically Bitcoin mining. So annual consumption of total Bitcoin mines is 22 something per year. I'm not really too sure what it stands for, but it is a lot because it is the equivalent to the total energy use in Ireland. And a single Bitcoin transaction is equal to the energy consumption of 31 American households. And all of this like transactions that happen literally every single second. It's supposed to be like 7 at a time. That's what's in the Bitcoin like white papers. It's pretty crazy of like the amount of energy that gets used. And theoretically, it's only going to get more difficult because, like, as I said, when more miners hop into this, they're going to have that much harder of math problems, which means they need to use that much more energy to then crunch that many more possibilities. And it's just going to like move up and up more exponentially. And that's why people say it's not sustainable. Additionally, Bitcoin mining has produced 20 megatons of CO2, which is equivalent to 1 million transatlantic flights, which is not a great stat. And 3/4 of mining happens in China. The reason for this is because China's electricity is very low, and that is directly related to the amount of profit you get out of mining. So why would you not go to a place that has very low electricity? And China uses a lot of coal for its energy because it is very cheap, but it is also very bad for the environment, which is a little bit concerning. But to build on that as well, not everything is as bad as what those stats seem. And there's been a lot of fake news out there that have been debunked by Bitcoin hardos. So, for example, okay, Bitcoin green energy. So total sustainable power mix could be as high as 56%, making Bitcoin mining one of the most sustainable industries globally. So what the heck this means is that every single country tracks where their energy comes from. So for example, the US uses 30.5% sustainable energy. Bitcoin, actually, they did a research into 1/3 of all of Bitcoin energy. And actually with that like 1/3, it was 76% of it was sustainable. So they said even worst case scenario based off that stat, 56% of energy used for Bitcoin is sustainable energy, which is great. And I put a little graphic down here at the bottom. This is actual a Bitcoin mining operation that is run off of the solar panels behind it, which is a prime example of that. But like I said with China before on how they use cheap energy and a lot of it's coal. For China, it is actually 15% or less than 15% used for sustainable energy, which is a little bit concerning, seeing how like most of Bitcoin mine is happening there.
Wait, Woody, just to jump in here a little bit. Can you go to the previous slide?
Yeah, of course.
So like 3/4 of mining happens in China. It's true until about like 2 months ago when China banned all of Bitcoin mining. So what happened there was that miners, and that kind of explained why Bitcoin price dropped around a month, 2 months ago, because people were like, oh shit, my operation just literally got banned. I need to liquidate so I can move elsewhere. So a lot of the miners sold a lot of Bitcoin and tried to move to adjacent countries. Some of them went to Afghanistan. That was a popular, oh, sorry, not Afghanistan. They went to Pakistan, my bad. I think that was a popular destination. And then the other most popular destination is the US. So currently the US actually has around 35 to 40% of total Bitcoin mining in the world. So that stat has changed a little bit since. That US is actually currently the biggest pool of that has the most miners, just because of the recent China ban.
Where in the US is it?
Sorry?
Where in the US are the majority of them?
I know a lot of them moved down south. Like a lot of the miners from China moved to like Texas and things like that, and that's becoming really popular. I don't know about the actual geographic breakdown. I just know like a lot of them did move down south. In terms of like energy consumption, like people are saying that renewable energy ranges from like 40 to 75%, that like all of the Bitcoin energy usage. And a lot of people, or actually a lot of mining pools are doing something that's really interesting, which is setting up factories near like oil and gas drilling sites. So there's a lot of excess natural gas that just gets wasted from those sites that doesn't really go elsewhere. And they're trying to harness that energy into Bitcoin mining. So that's really interesting to look at, seeing how they can like utilize inefficient energy usage. But also like in El Salvador, this is really cool. Well, after they adopted like Bitcoin's legal tender, the president made a tweet that was just like, we're gonna try to use the volcano energies because they have a lot of like volcanoes in Salvador, to see how they can use that energy to really bring up their Bitcoin mining operation. But I have no idea how that's going. Just some interesting things about the energy usage with like crypto mining. It's not like the whole phase when people are like, oh, this is terrible for the environment. Like it does obviously use a lot of energy, but a lot of the energy it uses is actually quite clean. And a lot of the other energy it uses is just like wasted energy. So I guess
Yeah, no, of course. And like a lot of those points are brought up. I remember the El Salvador as well, when he tweeted out the volcano emoji, and that was pretty sick. But yeah, no, it's like it talks about that as well. And like my source was from 2019. So that's pretty interesting on how it's changed that much in just 2 years. But yeah, it's a lot of it is green. And like there's also the other debates that people always bring up of like how much energy does the standard banking system use? Does all the ATMs use? Do all the printing of cash, like how much like pollution does that cause? And like is Bitcoin in the large macro scheme still better than it in that sense? And at that point, they're like both kind of bad. So it's kind of like, I don't know which one you choose. But no, that's interesting, especially with like getting out of China, and like because that's where a lot of like the negative connotation was back in the day, was because of regards to using coal. So that is actually great to hear. Thank you, Arthur.
No problem.
All right. So we'll get a little bit more into the tech side of things. because a lot of the crypto mining is in relation to that, or like the whole question of what is even the point of doing mining, like what is mining. So we'll get into that a little bit. So the whole point of mining is to prove legitimacy, and part of proving legitimacy is with Sybil attacks. So there's lots of fancy cryptography and consensus, but proof of work was really kicked off with Bitcoin. And what I mean by this is that cryptography and consensus with like the whole key models and signature models has genuinely been around since like the 1980s. But the whole proof of work and the aspect of creating chains is new with Bitcoin. And that is what this whole prevention of Sybil attacks is, and how we can create this chain to like really therefore verify it that much further, which I'll get into a little bit more. But how to prevent Sybil attacks. There's a couple other reasons or ways that people go about it. So when I talk about Twitter or Facebook here with an arms race, this is like how Twitter, for example, will put in an algorithm that tracks people's behavior. And if you have like, I don't know, bot-like behavior, they'll be in your account. And Facebook will then see Twitter put in this new algorithm, and then they'll like copy that exact same algorithm and then try to make it that a little bit better. And then it goes on and on and on to the point that like, you know, like your Facebook account will get banned because I think you're a bot, but really you're a real person. And that is one way to prevent it, but it's not 100% secure. And it's also managed by just Twitter or Facebook. And then additionally, that's like, as my next point brings it a little bit further, is that ideally to avoid Sybil attacks, there shouldn't be one entity that's responsible for it. So that's when the issues come in with like social security numbers, phone numbers, etc. So that if it is like social security numbers, there's still a government body that regulates all of it. Or phone numbers, it is the phone number companies that still regulate all of them. And it's not truly decentralized to the point that like it's like really secure that way. And the last way that's like really common, as I have my picture there, is a CAPTCHA. And CAPTCHAs kind of work because it does prove a human over a computer, but there is lots of problems that go along with CAPTCHAs. And with something as huge as like Bitcoin, for example, proving legitimacy by completing a CAPTCHA is not the ideal way to do it. But that is one comparison, is with CAPTCHAs. So what do you want out of work? So I'm gonna get a little bit into what work is at a very basic level, and then why the hell we do it. So my first point, what works is work. So that is in relation to the last slide as well. So it's like, okay, if what Twitter or Facebook does doesn't work, and if using social security numbers doesn't work and phone numbers doesn't work, then what the hell works? Well, what works is work. You cannot beat what is this whole system of what like Bitcoin has created, and that's what like has made its name to claim, or name to fame. So what do you want out of work? The first thing is time consuming. That proves legitimacy. So the whole aspect of it not being instant is actually a good thing, because having time used is actually a great way to like actually crunch out all the numbers, and it's actually something that's like designed into Bitcoin to be a good thing. I don't know exactly, didn't get into that too hard, but it is one of the like the perks of it. And then deterministic verification. So that's another thing out of work. So it's like, therefore you get to a verified answer at the end. Scalable, I'll get into that. I have another slide specifically on scalable, but it is great because I'll get into that after, but it's just kind of like you're able to scale it more by like putting in more energy and everything. And therefore it's like more work is more genuinely more work. And there's things that you can like actually like measure to get there. And then additionally it's memoryless, which everybody gets a chance, aka the fastest person doesn't solve it every time. That's what I talked about before with like a person that was 10% slower than, let's say, a bicycle. The bicycle in the real world will win it every time, but in this case will not. And it's memoryless, so that after like one work gets complete, it doesn't affect any of the other ones. So it's like a new ball game every single time you go. So the little graphic down there, I'll explain what that is. So this is a very basic graphic of what proof of work is. So the X's can be either 0 or 1, and there's just a basic algebraic X. So it can represent either number, and with computers it's zeros or ones. With these 5 red bricks, those are the ones that need to be verified. So those, the number that goes accordingly with it is this red brick is actually a 1. This red brick is actually a 0. This red brick is a 1. This one's a 1, this one's a 0. So what the computers will have to do, you can imagine these numbers are gone, and the computers will have to crunch guesses. So they'll guess that this one's a 1, maybe they'll guess this one's a 1, this one's a 0, blah, 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 and it'll just say if it's correct or not correct, and then they have to retry again. And that's what the whole proof of work is genuinely just guessing to then create this chain of proper numbers. And that is like at a very basic essence of what proof of work is. So you can like you can break it out mathematically pretty easily, and a lot of like mining it is in that sense of like how long the chain of answers you need to like solve, and like how many attempts theoretically will you have to do to solve it. So in this case, since there is 5 different blocks that you need to solve here, and there's 2 possibilities to do it, then 2 to the power of 5 is theoretically the number of possible attempts that you need to actually solve this, which I think is like 64. So in 64 attempts, you will 100% solve this proof of work. The only problem is through those 64 attempts, only one of them is actually worth anything, and the other 63 attempts is just complete waste of time, energy, and computer use. And I'll get into that in the con section of proof of work. But that is what proof of work is in a very basic sense. And it gets into chains where it gets more and more complex. At a very basic level, it is just adding more and more red blocks onto this chain. So therefore, it is like 2 to the power of, if there's another red block here, it'd be 2 to the power of 6, and then 2 to the power of 7, and it gets more and more complex. And that's how these math problems are able to get more complex. It just gets longer in that sense. So why is proof of work scalable? This is what I talked about previously. So it is because proof of work takes space to prove, time to verify, and it takes electricity. So it is scalable because you're able to just add in more of these 3 things, and therefore you will have more work. And that is very legitimate, and it is good in the sense that like with proof of stake, for example, it is scalable in the sense that if you own more of the said token, you will then get more rewards after. And that gets to be a little problematic with scalability, because if you do then have the majority of the stake, so like the majority of the coins, then you then control it. When it comes to proof of work, that's not actually what happens, and you can scale it up and up and up and up by having more space and more time and more electricity, but you won't have the majority of the world's electricity and space and time to like do all the mining. So therefore, that is why you can keep scaling it up and up, and that is one of the advantages to proof of work. Okay, so this is a question that is always asked of why do work? Like what is the point of doing all of this, like answering all these math equations? So it's like you answer these math equations, what is it actually doing? So the whole purpose of it is to keep time. And you hear about how people always say blockchain is ledgers, and ledgers is just a big long chain of timestamps. So Bitcoin came to this idea 12 plus years ago, and it is to use chained proof of work as distributed timestamping. So this is kind of like what I'm talking about, how I said consensus cryptography was back since the 80s, but this idea of creating a chain is new just to Bitcoin. So achieves consensus on messages sequence. One hash will have data on the other hash, and therefore proves which was first. So I have a graphic after this explaining it. I'll actually show it to explain a little bit. So the way it works is that, so this is a hash, and the number on the hash is the hash ID. So this is just like, so this, if there's a math problem that this blockchain needed to solve, or a miner needed to solve, the hash is the solution to it. So, sorry guys. So the hash that is then after it in the blockchain, inside of this block has the previous hash's identity or number. So therefore, you know the order of like which each block is. So as we talked about in the first week, a block holds 3 things. It is the previous number, whatever the point of the block is. In this case, it's a message that says like, oh, hi. And then the nonce, which is just like all the nonces is just it's proof that it did the work to therefore build this block. So the whole thing with the timestamps is that you can see the chain of, since there is a previous number here, and that's the previous one here, you know which one was first. So that solves things with like double spending. So for example, let's say I'm going to send 1 Bitcoin to Arthur, and I want to send 1 Bitcoin to Kev, and I send both at the same time. and they both are going through like their respective like chains, and they're like proving it's legitimate, blah 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 blah. And either one can seem fine. You can answer like and prove it true, but which one actually came first? And that's what the whole point of timing is. And that's why like there's the previous number in it. And that's what like this whole like chain has proved that like you cannot break into the chain. And I have one more slide talking about that as well. But like one hash will actually contain the information of the other one. If one is like completed before, so let's say I sent Arthur a Bitcoin 1 minute before I send one to Kevin. The one that's on Kevin, like that chain will actually contain the information on me sending to Arthur, and it's because the timestamp has already been put into it. So therefore, it like prevents that double spending. But one other thing I want to talk about with this graphic here that I think is pretty interesting, it's called reorging. So it's when, so this, for example, is a chain here. These are blocks, and this is a blockchain. The blockchain lab, let's go. So this second chain that comes down on it is when, so let's say, okay, so let's say there's a transaction that has to occur and it needs to run through the blockchain, and it runs through these blocks. So let's say you want to hop into this because you want to, I don't know, do something else. Like you want to change this message. That's the example that I gave in the lecture that I was talking about this. So you want to change the message. You can't actually hop into this chain because it's already developed, but instead you can create a sub chain off of this block. And that's called reorging. So why would you do this? And what is the point of creating a secondary chain on it? And the whole reason for it is that the way that the blockchain works is that the network will always choose the longest chain, and that is what it'll send through all transactions. So in this case, it'd be coming along, and then it realizes that this chain is longer, and all transactions will run through this set of blocks. So that is the whole point of reorging, and like why you would then create an additional chain onto it. And this is when I have it on my con slide as well, but with the 51% attack, and people always talk about that. That's like, oh, the concerns of like if somebody hacks and takes over 51% of the blockchain, they can take over the network. So the whole take over the network is in regards to exactly this. So if someone has 51% of the ability of the network, they could just reorg faster than the entire rest of the network put together. So if the entire network was trying to build on this one chain, and I owned or had the power of 51% of it, I could just reorg off of any of their blocks and build a chain that was longer than theirs, and therefore just take over all the transactions nonstop. And that's actually what like the whole 51% attack is. And I thought it was a good graphical representation of it. But the reason that this is in my proof of work slide or proof of work lecture is that the way you create a longer chain is by just doing more work. That's how Bitcoin works. If you do more work, you'll create a longer chain and transactions will flow through it. And that's why people do all of this work. That's why they get very expensive computers that can do all this work more quickly, is they can build a longer chain than the other competitor and therefore have the transactions flow through and therefore get the money to go along with it. So pros of proof of work. This is a rather small slide. I'm not going to lie compared to the cons, but I basically asked what are the pros of proof of work. So it is that it uses real world resources. It makes Bitcoin kind of seem more like gold than proof of stake, because that's all kind of just like, I don't know, imaginary. When this, it actually uses energy and time and computers, and it crunches away, and it is very real world applicable. So it also proves legitimacy like a CAPTCHA, which people understand, and therefore proves a human compared to just another computer. And then proof usage of real world resources, which I talked about, and you can't get that time and energy back. So it is very much like, I don't know, you prove the transaction happened, and you can't get that time and energy back. So therefore it's like really like set in stone that it happened. And that's what like people like the whole like thing about it is it's very natural and logical of what proof of work is compared to like a proof of stake. But when we get into the cons of proof of work, it gets a little bit larger. And the first is the cons of proof of work. So inefficient. Almost all attempts fail. So as I talked about back on this slide here, and so the number of like attempts that it'll take to solve this in this case is 2 to the power of 5, because there's 5 red blocks that we need to solve. When it comes to actual like proper like blockchains like Bitcoin chains, for example, it needs to solve an unbelievable amount of ones or zeros to like actually then solve that math problem. So like a lot of them, it's like specifically back in 2018, in the MIT lecture, he talked about how he did it, and it took 2 billion attempts to solve one block. And how it is that much harder because there's that many more miners into the system. But of your 2 billion attempts, your computer was crunching away and trying to solve all this when your computer could have used for something else. And all the energy that went to like crunching all this could be used something else because there's only one true solution. So it's very inefficient because you're trying 2 billion math problems to get one solution. It's a little ridiculous. And like all the energy, for example, that gets used for this just goes to waste for all of those like math problems that like, oh, it's not true. Therefore, it's just like, it's gassed. Second point here, can get outscaled. So, okay, can get outscaled. So 2 to the power 72, for example, this is exactly what I was talking about before. It's like 2 to the power 72. That's a huge number. And if you need to actually get that many like red bricks correct, so like yes, your 0 to 1 is correct, the like statistical or the math for you to require this is you're going to need a warehouse of computers, is what I'm getting at. It's such a big number that's so hard to solve that like to the point that like, and that's kind of why like the whole thing with like Bitcoin on how it's like not every Bitcoin will be mined is because it's going to get that much harder with every single Bitcoin that like it's like what provides the scarcity, but like also it's like it gets a little ridiculous that you need like a warehouse to solve like one math problem to then provide one more block. So that is called a proof of work that it gets a little ridiculous and gets outscaled. Granularity is high. Small players get pushed out of the game. So that's because there's all of these like big companies with these big crazy computers that can then solve the majority of these math problems. And you on your Dell trying to get into the game, it's just not feasible for you anymore. And there's no partial work prize. So let's say you solve, let's say there was 72 math problems here, like in the example. Let's say you solved 68 of them, but then some other big computer finished it right before you. So you used up all this time and energy to get 68 of them, but this other person solved 72 of them. You get no partial work prize for solving 68 of the 72 of them. It's just kind of like, okay, ciao, not a problem. So then it's like, it's kind of bad because like all those resources, they're then just thrown away. Lots of electricity, as I talked about before. Uses fabs, which could make more CPUs. So that's like what I was talking about, how like there's all of these CPUs getting put into, or all these fabs getting used to then mine and not get made for more computers, or to the point of like GPUs and all of that. It's like all of these resources are getting put towards mining, which just solves math problems that just get proved to not be correct when they could be used for like anything else. Something that has more of a purpose than just all of these math problems. Someday could affect electrical prices if, let's say, I don't know, America took on Bitcoin as a standard currency. Well, looks like America is about to get rinsed with lots of people trying to mine this Bitcoin because it's going to be like that much more popular. There's going to be that much more transactions, that much more money to be made. So then everything will be like burning away all of this power, and theoretically could affect electrical prices. Irregular timing. This is in regards to like sending money across a proof of work blockchain. Think about it. If you have used cryptocurrencies, like for example, Ethereum or Bitcoin that both use proof of work, you send some money with some ETH to your friend, and it could take either like 30 seconds or like 10 minutes. And when it takes 10 minutes, it's kind of stressful because you just sent this guy like a couple of $1,000s in ETH. That's where it's a little bit concerning with the irregular timing of proof of work, because it takes that long for them all to like approve it. And like luck could just be on the side of the computers, and it could solve it really quick. And that's why it happens quick sometimes. But and the last con is 51% attack. That's what I talked about as well before, about how if somebody theoretically controls 51% of the network, they could just reorg and make a chain faster because they can use that much more work, and just control the entire chain, because everyone else combined, the other 49% could not theoretically ever create a chain longer than what your 51% could. And therefore, kind of it takes away the entire purpose of proof of work. But that is the end of my presentation and rant of proof of work. And it may seem a little bit biased of me being against proof of work, but no, I think it is really great, and it's very logical. There's a lot of people out there that are very against it though, and that is why like Ethereum, for example, is moving to Ether 2.0, which is proof of stake, just to more of a feasible side of it. But I completely understand, and there is a lot of people out there that there's a lot of fake news that downplays it or gives it a bad rep, specifically with like the electrical side of it. And as Arthur brought up, there is a lot of measures that go into it, like sustainable energy. Yeah, no, that is the end of my lecture. Anybody is more than welcome to ask a question, or more than welcome to message me in future times and ask more clarifying questions as well. Yeah.
Just to jump in there and defend proof of work a little bit.
Give her.
Personally, like I don't have a side for like proof of work versus proof of stake. I honestly don't know enough about proof of stake, but like on a very high level, right? Like the reason why anything has value is because there's at the end of the day work put into it. When crypto is just an internet coin that anyone can make, and if you use in a proof of stake system, there's no real input that determines the value. Whereas in a proof of work system, you are buying GPUs, you're using electricity. There's real input that costs real money that kind of determines the value of the coin a little bit, right? Not that it's the only reason, but like there is some sort of value input. The other thing is, I think for proof of work, there is a division between the miners and like the node operators, right? So I think it makes it a little bit more decentralized when the mining on proof of work is an external process to a node network, which is the people holding the ledger. But whereas in proof of stake, the staker only have a say when they deposit in the ledger. So there's a little bit of a separation there for proof of work, which I think is good for a decentralized system. And yeah, that's like the main thing about it. I also don't know if proof of stake solves like the Byzantine generals problem or like the double spending problem. I think it does, but I haven't looked too much into that to really know.
It would,
But
it
I
would
think
have
proof
to.
of work's been along for a long time. It has done a lot of good stuff. Like in terms of like transaction speed, that's kind of like the main argument against it. There can just be better second layers, right? Like sending Bitcoin, like it doesn't actually take 10 minutes. You can just use a different network.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
Your second point was definitely what I agree with a lot as well. And I am by no means saying proof of stake is a perfect system compared to proof of work, which is not. It is just the whole, I'm not a big fan of the argument of like, oh, the legitimacy of the energy and like the time and the computers that need to get put into proof of work that really like show like, oh, it is mined and it is legit, when it's like all of that resources could go to something else, because there is another solution for it. That is why I'm on the proof of stake wave. But I do really not like proof of stake when it comes to the fact that like it kind of doesn't solve like the whole thing with like crypto and like how it's like, or with the mining is like, hey, you do the work, you get the rewards. That's not like the classic American, the richer get richer. Sorry, the richest get richer, which proof of stake kind of just really is the richest get richer. It's like, hey, if like you own a bunch of the coin, you stake it, then you're just gonna get that much more, which is what I don't like of the proof of stake. But then again, I don't know. I think there's lots of other benefits on the side of it as well. But I get what you're saying. I haven't looked into proof of stake enough either. There's a lot of people rinsing proof of work out there, and it's kind of interesting. Ali, Kev, any questions, concerns?
All good, Woody. Good work.
Cheers, dude. Cool. In that case, I will stop my recording.
I had a question in the chat.
Oh, shoot, my bad. Yeah, I'm sure now. Okay, I get what you're saying. I generally don't have an answer for you. What do you mean with governments recovering those transactions? Okay. Okay, no, I'm not too sure. I'm generally not. I'll actually look into that and let you know after because I'm actually curious about that myself. I genuinely have no answer for you right now though. Yeah, no, I heard of that as well. But no, I can't speak to it more than that as well. No worries, brother. All right.
All right, thanks, dude.
No worries. Happy to do it, guys.